Kicking off the list at number 10, Sandman. William Baker entered the world of comics in 1963 with Amazing Spider-Man issue 4. He was seen as one of the main villains in Spider-Man 3, and yes, he was at one point an Avenger. Who knew? So when Flint Marko held the mantle of Sandman, he bumped into the Thing, and they had a little heart-to-heart, a little chat about life and how to use your abilities perhaps for, for good. So he started to help Spider-Man a bit here and there, and then in Avengers issue 329, Captain America announced a new Avengers team, and on that roster was the Sandman. He was one of the 7 reserve members. He of course didn't last because, well, he was a reserve member for one, and coming from the villain side already, I'm sure he had one foot out the door anyways. Shame. And before we continue on with this list, guys, if you haven't already, make sure to hit that like button down below because those little thumbs up are great for the page and great for our studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now back to some Avengers who became villains. Number 9, Sentry. Making his first appearance in Sentry issue 1, of course, Robert Reynolds was a struggling addict who made his way into a laboratory and discovered something called the Golden Sentry Serum. So of course he consumed it, and then he got the surprise of a lifetime when he was then given the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns. That's a lot of power. That plus a homemade costume equals a brand new superhero. Robert fought alongside the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, then the new Avengers. Things changed for Robert when Norman Osborn decided to put together a little team of his own, the Dark Avengers. So Sentry was also once a Horseman of Death, serving alongside Banshee, Grim Reaper, and Daken. He even considered himself as the heir to Apocalypse at one point, so definitely not an Avenger anymore, for sure. Number 8, Namor. King Namor is of course Marvel's version of Aquaman. He's the king of the seas, and he's also not a fan of metahumans, surprisingly. He mostly would go head to head with Black Panther and Wakanda. He wasn't a fan of Wakanda. He often attacked it quite a bit. He was asked to join the Avengers back in 1963 in Avengers issue 16, but he declined. Too cool for school. We get it. All right, cool. He did join for a brief amount of time though, but when the Avengers vs. X-Men happened, he stood with the X-Men and he fought Luke Cage and the Thing. What a traitor. I mean, he's not the worst, but if you're not with the Avengers, you're clearly against them, especially after you've helped them out for a bit and then you change your mind. Come on, dude. Number 7. The Incredible Hulk. So Thor Ragnarok was loosely based off the Planet Hulk storyline. I say loosely because, well, the comics, that story didn't end up going so well, obviously. Because on Sakaar, the rocket that he arrived in ended up blowing to smithereens, causing some casualties that left the Hulk a little heartbroken, to say the least. So he rolls his shoulders back a few times, and then he heads back to Earth, and thus begins the World War Hulk storyline. He just destroys everybody. It's so scary. I mean, all the heroes that Earth has come to love just in the path of this death train. Like, he locks the Illuminati in Madison Square Garden and then makes them fight to the death. It's like Madison Square Up Garden. I mean, once you spend enough time on Sakaar, I guess it becomes second nature. I don't know. The whole story is a bloody good mess. It's great seeing the panic on the Avengers' faces the entire time because they know that they're screwed, and that's what makes it real and scary. Number 6, Sabretooth. Victor Creed made his debut in Iron Fist issue 14, and he's been known as one of Wolverine's biggest rivals. But during the Avengers X-Men Axis storyline, the Red Skull stole the brain of Charles Xavier, and he planned to wipe out all of mutant kind. And then in book 2, we see the inversion, where good goes bad and bad goes good. Interesting time, because Doctor Doom and Scarlet Witch cast a spell, so now Sabretooth was on the good side. So after the dust settled, Iron Man made it so that Sabretooth wouldn't flip back, so Sabretooth joined the Avengers Unity Division. This didn't last forever, and recently in House of X issue 6, Sabretooth faced trial among the Quiet Council, and let's just say he ended up swallowed by Krakoa below the surface, where he's trapped in a state of permanent stasis for the rest of his life. How comfortable. I mean, he kind of made it easy for them too. He clearly didn't fight for his case. Number 5, Hawkeye. In the MCU, Hawkeye's had it pretty rough. I mean, by the time Avengers Endgame rolled out, Clint had lost his entire family, and then 5 years after Thanos snapped his fingers, we catch up with him in Tokyo, and he's not the same guy that we once knew. Now he's taken heads and he's taken names. We get our first look at Ronan. Now, I know that Natasha meets up with him and they have a beautiful moment, and then he rejoins the team. He even volunteers to test the time travel tech himself. But if we look back at Avengers 1, Hawkeye is a villain for like most of that movie. He turns evil before the opening title even pops up on screen. He's the guy who took down the helicarrier. He almost killed everybody on that boat. Now I know Loki had a scepter and that caused it, so if we look at Avengers 1 and Avengers Endgame, I think it's safe to meet in the middle and say that the MCU Hawkeye has been somewhat of a Avenger who turned into a villain, at least for a bit. Number 4. Quicksilver. Pietro Maximoff is the twin brother of Wanda Maximoff, and in Avengers West Coast issue 57 back in 1965, he joined the team. Pietro has been trouble for the team for a long time. I mean, he convinced Wanda to do what she did in House of M. He's framed the Avengers for treason, and he has no problem using pieces of Terrigen to give his daughter Luna special abilities, even though he knows he shouldn't do that. Also, that whole thing with Layla Miller after House of M, where he saved her life just so he can be the one to take her out, believing that she was responsible for the House of M event. Yeah, it's safe to say he went from Avenger to villain. Like, those are just 3 out of many things. In West Coast Avengers 33, Magneto's bloodline got the best of him, and he got fellow Avengers captured by the communist gang. Fastest guy ever, but makes the most mistakes. I don't understand. Number 3, the Vision. Making his glorious debut in Avengers issue 57, the Vision is a synthezoid, and in the comics he was created by Ultron using parts of the original Human Torch and the mind of Wonder Man. Just bam, smack together. He turned on his original creator, Phineas Horton, and he joined the Avengers. Nice. And then in the MCU, he's created as Ultron's new body, but with the addition of the Mind Stone and a little bit of Jarvis, we have an android Avenger. Also nice. But during the Secret Empire storyline, Vision was part of Hydra's Avengers when they were taking over the world, all from an AI virus. Gotta get that firewall installed, my friend. Arnim Zola was the one to blame for that. So who knows, maybe now with the White Vision being free in the MCU and pretty much reborn, his firewall probably isn't the best either. Also, it's confusing because it appears that Vision gets all of his memories back, but then he flies away and then he's not to be seen for the rest of the show. So clearly something's up here. I'm betting the MCU does him dirty. Maybe they reprogram him to make him evil or something. Or he might become Ultron. That was a big theory for WandaVision. We'll see. Number 2, Captain America. There are a couple lines from Steve Rogers that fans will remember that took place in the MCU, like Avengers Assemble, that is America's ass, but the line Hail Hydra was followed by a roar of applause on opening night of Endgame. Why? Because not only does he use his post-Avengers knowledge to obtain the scepter, which in that of itself is already pretty sweet, but because the audience expects another cool elevator fight and Steve outsmarts us. But the line Hail Hydra comes right from the comics, and a bit of a darker scenario. The last words of Captain America Steve Rogers were that of Hail Hydra, and fans were not happy. This was huge news. People were pretty upset. Readers were sending in death threats. Like, could you imagine? The 2017 series Secret Empire concluded that bad Captain America was a double and that the good guy was locked in the cosmic cube. Okay, solid save, but those images of evil Steve will live in our heads rent-free, so thank you for that. And finally, number 1, Scarlet Witch. Of course, I'm saving her for last, of course. She's the daughter of Magneto and the twin brother of Quicksilver, aka Pietro Maximoff. Now, she was on her father's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, but at one point she did of course join the Avengers as well. She's one of the biggest Marvel characters ever, and during the events of M-Day, she spoke those 3 words, no more mutants, and just like that, a mass amount of mutants were depowered or wiped out. That large number being 986,618, only leaving a couple hundred left. That's crazy, that's like Thanos level destruction almost. And then in the MCU as well, we just watched Wanda become a villain over a 9-week period. She had a mental breakdown similar to M-Day, and she trapped Westview in her hex. Now, of course, she frees everybody and things look pretty back to normal, kind of, by the end of the show. But with that after credit scene of her studying the Darkhold, and with the given knowledge that Wanda is in the next Doctor Strange movie, she's for sure going to become a villain. Even for a little bit, she'll be a villain, for sure. I can't wait to see what else she does. She looked like she was studying up pretty fast while she was sipping tea on her doorstep, so I don't know. Her mind's crazy. She can do anything she wants.
And at number 10 is Venom. Venom first arrived on the scene when he hitched a ride to Earth via Peter Parker, with Peter thinking that he just got lucky scoring a new spider suit. Turns out the black suit was an alien symbiote. Over the years, Venom's become an anti-hero though, serving up his brand of justice in arcs like 1993's Venom Lethal Protector, Maximum Carnage, where he faces off against Carnage, obviously, whom he feels responsible for, and steering away from Eddie Brock here when he bonded with Flash Thompson, a celebrated military vet, becoming Agent Venom. Up next, number 9 is Quicksilver. Initially a member of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants with his twin sister Scarlet Witch, recruited by Magneto, he eventually bails on the team after Magneto and Toad are abducted by the Stranger. At this time, he and his sister go back to Europe and are recruited to the Avengers. But then they go back and join sides with Magneto until they realize that he's actually a bit too evil, but then go good again, and well, you guys get the idea. Outside of the main continuity, this flip-floppiness occurs throughout other alternate universes too, including House of M, and technically Son of M. Talk about shades of grey. Up next, number 8 is the Punisher. Here we have a case of a character whose bad to goodness is a little ambiguous. So we all know the origin story. Frank Castle's family were murdered by the mob, and out of revenge he becomes a vigilante who employs the likes of murder, torture, kidnapping, extortion, you name it. And he murdered a ton of people over the decade that preceded that. The Italian Mafia, the Russian Mafia, the Yakuza, street gangs, muggers, rapists, the list goes on. So naturally he clashes with some heroes including Daredevil and Spider-Man, but would also occasionally become their ally. Despite the blurred lines, his mission has always been inherently good, even if the methods of his retribution speak otherwise. Up next, number 7 is Jason Todd. From a publication history standpoint, I can't blame Jason Todd for becoming a villain. In 1988, Dennis O'Neil convinced DC Comics president Jeanette Kahn to run a poll where readers would decide Jason's fate, that fate being whether he lived or died. And they chose to kill him off via the Joker in the Death of a Family arc. A lot of people hated them over it. There's a lot of hate mail. And even Frank Miller was like, guys, that was some ugly stuff you did there. Anyway, Jason came back in the Under the Hood arc as the new Red Hood. He wages a gang war, gets real obsessed with Tim Drake, and Batman ultimately defeats him. And flash forward quite a bit, the New 52 retcons the out of him. Whereas Red Hood, he's the leader of the Outlaws, and even a member of Batman Incorporated. And then there was another retcon with Rebirth, but I think we'll move on from here. There's a lot about Jason Todd's history here that we won't be able to touch on in one video. But hey, if you guys want a top 10 Jason Todd facts, let us know. Up next, number 6 is Angel. Getting into Buffy the Vampire Slayer here, Angel was previously known as Angelus back in the day, that day being the 18th century, where he was an Irishman turned into a vampire. He was known for being the most sadistic vamp in European history. He pissed off a clan of gypsies though, who then cursed him, giving him his soul back, and therefore tormenting him greatly for years until he crossed paths with Buffy, and found purpose again. And love in the second season, which then makes his soul get taken away from him again because the curse breaks, and then he goes on a disastrous spree returning to his murderous roots. Rest in peace, Miss Calendar. But luckily Willow saves the day, figuring out how to return his soul with a little bit of magic. And floppy disks, of course. And his soul returns, but Buffy and Angel are never really the same again, prompting him to eventually leave Sunnydale for LA, thus starting his own spin-off show in 1999. Up next, number 5 is the Scarlet Witch. Well, I kinda gave you guys the initial back and forth breakdown in her brother's number, and while the two are generally always on the same side, Scarlet Witch tends to be a bit of a go-to for whenever Marvel wants to mess reality up. So Wanda tends to use her reality warping abilities with decent but selfish intentions, usually having catastrophic effects. House of M, for example. She does end up reverting things back to normal though, so yay. In at number 4 is Galactus. Galactus was originally created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby to act as an antagonist that would break the supervillain mold. They felt the need to top themselves by creating an evil doer who had godlike powers. After a super adorable encounter with Squirrel Girl and an encounter with the Ultimates where they took his birthing chamber and combined it with ISO 8, Galactus went from Devourer of Worlds to the Lifebringer. He doesn't want to eat planets, he wants to bring life to them. And he does, starting with the first planet he had ever devoured. From here on out, he's then forcibly transformed back to the Devourer of Worlds, and then again as Lifebringer. Good ol' flip-flop. But hey, Galactus is growing on me these days, so maybe that's something. And at number 3 is Harley Quinn. During the New 52, Harley got a bit of a life makeover. After a stint with the Suicide Squad and a relapse with the Joker, she got her own ongoing series penned by Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti. And while we won't talk about the controversy of the Break Into Comics contest with Harley Quinn, needless to say, the series made an impact, making Harley into an anti-hero. She ends up creating a crime-fighting team made up of young women and one gay guy, and even agrees to help a woman whose daughter was kidnapped by a Hollywood gang. In Rebirth, she's been made the leader of the Suicide Squad, along with still maintaining her own solo series, which is pretty neat considering her comic has shipped more comics than any other DC Rebirth title so far since 2016. In at number 2 is Magneto. So getting a little flip-floppy here, since Magneto generally is classified as a supervillain, one of the greatest of all time according to some lists, but At times, he's also an anti-hero, aligning himself with the X-Men during certain times of need. His ideologies about mutants and the human species do put him on a bit more of a sinister plane, yet it's all rooting out of a desire to help mutants rather than the more selfish ambitions of other villains. Sometimes terrorist, sometimes revolutionary, it's a bit hard to pinpoint Magneto as just a bad guy. He's just more ambiguous than that, which is what makes him one of the more complex and dynamic characters in comic book history. And finally, at number 1 is Deadpool. While Wade Wilson has always been lovable, he started off his masked career as an assassin, hired to go after the good guys. In his first appearance, he's hired by Tolliver to attack Cable and the New Mutants. He was well received, and became a recurring character in the X-Force before getting his own miniseries, penned by Mark Waid, who would later go on to say, I quote, "Frankly, if I had known Deadpool was such a creep when I agreed to write the miniseries, I wouldn't have done it. Someone who hasn't paid for their crimes presents a problem for me." Well, apparently not to the fans though, since the Merc with a Mouth has become one of the most beloved comic book characters in all of history, or at least for our generation.
Number 10. Clayface. A character for whom the first question has to be, which one? We're talking about Basil Karlo, the first Clayface, who first appeared in Detective Comics number 40. There are 9 Clayfaces for the record, more if you count some smaller story arcs. Basil Karlo was initially an actor who went insane after hearing there was a remake of a classic horror film he had starred in without him. Thusly, he dons the mask of Clayface, a villain he once played, and begins killing the actors. He eventually gains the ability to shapeshift at a much later point by injecting himself with blood samples from Preston Payne, Matt Hagen, and Sandra Fuller, 3 of the other Clayfaces. This gives him the more traditionally recognized Clayface abilities and character design. However, like all characters, Karlo has changed over time. His most recent appearance in Rebirth has painted him in a more sympathetic light, saddened over becoming a monster. In Detective Comics number 934, released in 2016, Karlo is recruited to join the new team of Gotham heroes that Batman is setting up. An offer which Karlo accepts. How long will this new and improved Clayface last? Only time will tell, which is what makes him number 10. We have to wait and see. Someone else whose past haunts them in at number 9, Black Widow. Natasha Romanova, also known as Natasha Romanoff, first appeared in Tales of Suspense number 52 back in 1964. She first appeared as an antagonist for Iron Man. Her history has her hailing from Russia, first starting out as an eager Soviet spy and later retconned to her more recognized origin. That of her being raised by the Black Ops program, specifically Department X for orphan girls, where she is brainwashed and trained in the Red Room, as well as enhanced with both psycho and biotech. It takes her years to break free of her psychological trauma, which she does with the help of Hawkeye, and manages to defect, becoming a double agent. Her villainous past is well known and has been used as a narrative element for many of her stories. Someone she actually aided on his path to villainy in at number 8. It's Hawkeye. The first Hawkeye, Clint Barton. He appeared in Tales of Suspense number 57, released in 1964. Hawkeye is introduced as being jealous of all the attention afforded to Iron Man after he saves some bystanders from a loose pinwheel at Coney Island where Hawkeye works as a marksman, and a pretty underappreciated one. Hawkeye quickly makes his own costume and takes to the streets, but in stopping a thief from robbing a jewelry store, he gets mistaken for said thief, and thus his criminal career is born. He is shortly after recruited by the Black Widow, who he is quite taken with, and is manipulated into going after Iron Man. Hawkeye wasn't a villain for long. In fact, he joined the Avengers in Avengers Volume 1, number 16 in 1965. Still, his genesis and reasoning for putting on the costume is pretty funny. Jealousy is not the most heroic of motivations. These showboatsman-like elements to his personality still emerge from time to time, and it's always a treat when they do. Every superhero team needs a jerk. They also need a suave ladies man, and we have one in at number 7. It's Gambit. Remy LeBeau from the X-Men makes his first full non-cameo appearance in Uncanny X-Men Volume 1, number 266 in 1990. Though there is some debate about that, but we'd be here all day, nitpicking. Gambit was kidnapped as a baby and raised by the LeBeau Clan Thieves Guild, and ultimately ended up being adopted by the guild's patriarch. A lot happened in between, including a brief stint being captured by a child slave trader, but he ends up being hired by Mr. Sinister. This leads to his involvement in some key moments, such as witnessing Wolverine's escape from Weapon X, and finding and burning Nathaniel Essex's diaries. Eventually expelled from the Thieves Guild, he ends up working full-time for Mr. Sinister, who modifies his powers and has him take part in a significant massacre of the Morlocks. However, Gambit's conscience begins to chafe at him, and he eventually leaves to wander the world and become a master thief. Oh, I'm so guilty. Emma Steele. Upon his travels, he encounters a de-aged Storm and saves her from the Shadow King, and is led back to the X-Men. Gambit's transformation to hero is slow, and his past is full of questionable actions that make not only his teammates question him, but him question himself. Gambit doesn't always feel at home with the X-Men, but has come to be a key part of the superhero community, whether he is with them or not. Someone people often think of when they think of Gambit, and at number 6, Rogue. Rogue's first published appearance was in Avengers Annual number 10 in 1981, although her full background was not given until years later, which has ultimately led to some conflict with previously released backstories. Regardless, here's what has remained true. Rogue has had a difficult childhood, particularly after her powers manifest, culminating in her being traumatized after she accidentally puts the boy she has a crush on in a coma. Taken in by Mystique prior to this incident, her anger and bitterness make her an easy target, and she is recruited into the Brotherhood of Mutants. Rogue quickly becomes part of the group's terrorist activities, and during an attempted prison escape, she uses her powers to absorb Ms. Marvel's. However, due to the prolonged amount of contact required, she also absorbs her psyche, and the transfer of powers becomes permanent. This is actually the reason that Rogue can fly. However, when Rogue later tries to absorb Rom the Space Knight, she experiences his feelings of nobility and sacrifice that begin to change her as a person. As Rogue uses her powers and absorbs more and more psyches, the more hers becomes damaged. Eventually, with nowhere else to turn, Rogue seeks out Professor Xavier and the X-Men for help. Professor Xavier invites her to stay and become one of the X-Men. Rogue has come a long way, finding confidence in herself and forgiving herself for her past actions. She is now a powerful force for good, and most likely always would have been had she had better influences in her youth. She has become an iconic character, as has her relationship with fellow reformed villain Gambit. Also Magneto, but we don't have time for that. More complex backstory in at number 5, Emma Frost. Emma initially appeared as a villain, the White Queen of the Hellfire Club. Her first appearance was during the iconic storyline The Dark Phoenix Saga, issues 129 to 138 of the Uncanny X-Men that ran in 1980. She was part of the plot that attempted to take control of Jean Grey's mind and turn her to the club's own devices, which backfires spectacularly. Her signature design was inspired by Emma Peel from the 1960s Avengers series, specifically the outfit worn by Diana Rigg in the episode Queen of Sin. Years later, following the devastating attack on the mutant island of Genosha, Emma Frost is rescued by the X-Men and ultimately joins. This culminates not only her switching allegiances and becoming a key member of the team, but in starting a romantic relationship with Cyclops that has become one of Marvel's most enduring couples. At this point, they've probably actually been together longer than him and Jean. Number 4, the Pied Piper, Hartley Rathaway from The Flash. The Pied Piper first appeared in The Flash number 106 back in 1959. Born deaf, Rathaway was able to hear after receiving implants, in his first origin from his father, later from Dr. Will Magnus. Either way, he became obsessed with sound and began experimenting, which granted him the ability to hypnotize and later on create sonic weapons. Because he's also a genius, like a disproportionate amount of people in any superhero universe are. The Pied Piper was a villain of the second Flash, Barry Allen, but retired after his death and went on to become a champion for the underprivileged. He also became one of DC's first openly gay characters and became a good friend to the third Flash, Wally West. While Hartley has had his relapses, he remains pretty firmly on the side of good. Someone who doesn't seem to relapse though people keep waiting for it at number 3, Plastic Man, Patrick Eel O'Brien from Quality Comics. Later, the rights to his character were purchased by DC. He made his first appearance in Police Comics number 1. Orphaned at age 10, Patrick has to live on the streets off his wits. He becomes a burglar specializing in safe cracking. However, one night during an escape, he was shot and fell into a vat of chemicals. And we all know what that means. Fantastic powers. Not certain death. This gave him the ability to mold and stretch himself into any shape. So maybe Rubber Man would be more apt. Or Elastic Man, which wasn't taken at the time as a name, but oh well, doesn't matter, he became Plastic Man. However, it's gaining these powers that makes Plastic Man give up on his life of crime, as he is determined to use these powers for good, starting by crafting the most ridiculous costume he could think of. He is a more comedic-based superhero and frequently the butt of jokes, and also some small degree of skepticism given his past, but he has good intentions and his powers are incredibly useful. Think Mr. Fantastic if he wasn't a jerk. Someone trying hard to be a jerk and failing in at number 2, Megamind. Released in 2010, this film focused on the titular Megamind, who arrives on Earth at the same time as his rival, Metro Man. While Metro Man lands in a mansion, Megamind lands in a prison. Seeking to fit in but never quite achieving it thanks to his accident-prone nature and Metro Man's penchant for showing off, Megamind decides that if he can't be a hero, he'll be a villain. However, after he seemingly succeeds in taking out Metro Man, he finds a void in his life that can no longer be filled by villainy. This whole film is a fun satire of the superhero genre, particularly of the codependence of the hero-villain relationship. Megamind's slow transformation is a joy to witness and feels genuine. It's just a fun ride meant to encourage viewers that you can rise above what people expect from you, and adjust what you expect from yourself.
It's taken me a long time to find my calling. Now it's about time you find yours.
Another permanent convert in at number 1, Gru from Despicable Me. Also released in 2010, Gru is once the world's most well-known supervillain. It seems he developed a penchant for being bad after an upbringing where many of his talents were neglected. Petty and out to perform the most outlandish of crimes, his status as the greatest supervillain is threatened by a new up-and-coming rival, Vector. However, a more insidious threat soon emerges: fatherhood and the lure of domestic responsibility. Gru finds being a good father much more appealing than being a good supervillain, and he changes his life to better live up to the expectations of his new young family. Lighthearted and sweet, this tale will leave you inspired that you can have it all: adorable minions, a secret lair, and a happy family.
Number 10. Harley Quinn. There was a time when Harley Quinn in the comics ended up being recruited by Granny Goodness of Apocalypse. She would end up going with her to Apocalypse and even end up being convinced by her to join her team of female Furies, who are effectively new gods. This only ended up being a thing for a few issues, but gave Harley a pretty rad new look and a hammer. During her time as a Fury, she took up the name Hammer Harleen. Because the female Furies are considered new gods, this technically made Harley Quinn a god, temporarily. The whole reason that she ended up joining in the comics was because she was on vacation and looking to take a break from her life, a bit of a escapism if you will, which this new cosmic role provided in spades. I mean, it's a pretty cool vacation if you get to just be a female Fury for a little while, right? However, eventually it was time for Harley to return to her life, and so she had to fight her way off the team in the end, because, you know, people don't really leave the female Furies peacefully. Also, I'm pretty sure she was not a great female Fury. We also see her time as a female Fury hinted at in season 2 of the Harley Quinn animated series. Number 9. Blackheart. Blackheart is the son of Mephisto, who would eventually seek to overthrow his father and become a ruler of a portion of hell. Just a portion. Not only was he basically born into godhood, but he also worked hard to earn it for himself, or he at least worked hard to employ other people to help him in earning it for himself. So, didn't really earn it for himself, I guess. Mephisto created Blackheart out of all the evil energy gathered from centuries of misdeeds committed on a hill in New York called Christ's Crown. Blackheart would eventually build a town around Christ's Crown that he would rule, but after being defeated by Wolverine, the Punisher, and Ghost Rider, he would recruit them to help him overthrow his father. Also, Wolverine, the Punisher, and Ghost Rider is like a pretty OP like gang of heroes, I think. Number 8. Korvac. Michael Korvac was a villain from the future who sought more power and influence, traveling back in time and becoming godlike in terms of his power levels when he managed to take on some of the power cosmic. Pretty sweet. His newly founded powers and the way he used them eventually attracted the attention of the Avengers, who he managed to defeat with the help of his romantic partner, Karina Tivan, daughter of the Collector, a name that was actually also given to the Collector's servant in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. She was named Karina, though I imagine she was not meant to be a stand-in for his daughter, so if you saw her and you were like, is that his daughter? Probably not. She was the one that got all like explodey when she touched the Infinity Gem. Not a good look. However, in the comics, in the end, Karina came to lose faith in Korvac, and it was because of this that he decided to take his own life and undo what he had done, using his powers to bring back the fallen Avengers. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, if you are loving it as much as I am loving it, be sure to show us some love by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 7. Savitar. Savitar's name literally means god of motion in Hindu, so it's no surprise that this villain is considered a god to some. He basically became a speed god, even going so far as to create a kind of religion, or at the very least I think we can call it a cult, surrounding him. He gathered followers and became known as their leader. Even in his absence, his cult, known as the Thunderbolt Agents at the time, flourished and grew, even without him. That's how powerful Savitar's beliefs are. Or believing in Savitar is, I guess. Savitar is also known for being an enemy of the Flash, and in the CW verse is literally the evil version of Barry Allen from an alternate timeline. But in the comics, not so much. In the comics, I think we still don't know who he is, actually. And I feel like that's been a thing forever, and is still a thing now, even in Prime Earth continuity. Who is Savitar? We don't know. Number 6. Apocalypse. Apocalypse became a god very briefly during the Otherworld tournament of Ten of Swords. Of course, some may see him as a godlike being all the time, but at this moment he truly was a god, just as his wife had been before him. Though here, Apocalypse was also able to show his strength and resilient will off, separate from the godlike power that he attained. Near the end of the tournament, an all-out war broke out when Apocalypse, after winning the battle against Genesis, refused to kill her. Annihilation took over Genesis, causing a war between all involved, including the Amenthi demons. However, Apocalypse would manage to wrench free the golden mask of annihilation from Genesis, sundering their connection. As such, the mask would then possess him, but Apocalypse's will was strong, and he was able to resist the temptation of its power. He simply used it to make the Amenthi stand down, causing a ceasefire basically. Saturnine would then remove the mask from Apocalypse and turn it into a staff, ba-boom, with her magics, making it much less of an influential artifact from there on out. I feel like you know you're powerful if you're like, yeah, I'm just gonna wear a mask that turns me into a god and be able to be like, I don't really want to be influenced by you, so I'm just not gonna do that. Like, that's power. Number 5. Thanos. Thanos has been godlike many times, including the Infinity Gauntlet story, but he also basically became a god in an alternate future where he had succeeded in wiping out almost all life in the universe, in the Thanos Wins story arc. Only a few opponents were left standing there, including himself. He had killed everyone in order to be with death, and had his herald, Cosmic Ghost Rider, go to retrieve his past self to help him with one final task: to take out the great and older version of Thanos himself, King Thanos, if you will. This would thereby allow him to be with death, but the older version of Thanos himself needed help to do the deed. He was like, I can't take my own life. I need some help here. Help me out. However, younger Thanos was over his love of death at the time and saw this older version as being weak for asking for help, despite the fact that he was so successful and terrifying in his own reality. Also, Thanos, I feel like asking for help does not make you weak. That's just my opinion, but hey. Younger Thanos decided to leave his older self alone, returning to his own reality and refusing to become him, thereby denying this older King Thanos' very existence. So, he was a god, but now he's gone. Bye! Number 4. Joker. There was a time in the comics when the Joker ended up getting 99.9% of Mr. Mixie's Pitilix power. Mr. Mixie had only intended to give him 0.01%, but was tricked into doing just the opposite, because ain't that just how it goes. With this level of power, Joker ruled as a god. He did all sorts of wacky and awful things. He ate all of China, put Superman in an insane asylum, and tormented and tortured Batman daily, killing him on repeat, but basically always bringing him back to life. He was defeated though, and lost his power when it was acknowledged that without Batman, the Joker was nothing, and he simply couldn't exist without the hero, which was why he had never killed him permanently with his newfound power. This weakness ended up being his downfall. Number 3. Gore the God Butcher. Gore the God Butcher reveals himself to have become a god through permanently bonding and integrating with the All Black on the alternate Earth of 14412, a future where Thor becomes King Thor. So many kings on my list. Gore, in transferring his own consciousness into the Necrosword and thereby bonding permanently with the All Black, has become an eternal being incapable of dying. Gore had basically become one with the universe. He would still end up being subdued, but it would require him unleashing the god Tempest from within Mjolnir to do so. And even then, this version of him wasn't technically dead, just rendered powerless and pretty permanently incapacitated. But still, I don't think he killed him there. Number 2. Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy was, I suppose, more of a ruler than a god, but she definitely appeared godlike in terms of her powers during the Everyone Loves Ivy arc of Tom King's Batman. She also did a pretty good job, I think, of controlling everything, which is why I put her so high up on my list. Also, I just like Poison Ivy, so come at me. You don't like Poison Ivy? Let's fight in the comments. No, I'm kidding. Let's not fight. Let's just love each other and love our differences. In this story, Ivy finds a way to control the world's population through the greens that they consume. Only a few manage to evade her influence, but overall the world seems to be even better with Ivy ruling it, to be honest. However, taking away people's free will in exchange for turning them into a happy collective is pretty frowned upon by the heroes who do remain. Batman finds a way to free Harley Quinn from Poison Ivy's influence, hoping that she might be able to resolve this issue more peacefully, or just, resolve it at all, as both Batman and Catwoman are a bit at a loss as to what to do, considering how powerful Ivy is at this point. Harley manages to talk Pamela down, and in the end, Poison Ivy gives up her control willingly.
But also, how cool would it be if Ivy just continued to rule the world and that was DC now, and that was just how it went forever? I personally would read that comic book. I think it'd be great. Number 1. Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom ended up becoming a god during the recreation of Battleworld. When the incursions happened, he was the one to stand up and take on the power of Molecule Man in order to try and save the multiverse. He wasn't a great god in this new world, but hey, he did his best, stitching together all the alternate worlds with the Earth of 616 to save each in creating a patchwork-like interconnected reality where each alternate Earth basically became like a province or a territory in this new battle world, which God Emperor Doom himself ruled over. In the end, Doom was convinced to give up his power in order to make things right, and turn the universe back into something similar to what it had been previously. He would pass on Molecule Man's power to Reed Richards, who in turn would alter reality so that Doom's face would be healed again, and so that Doom would believe the Fantastic Four were no more, which allowed him to finally be happy, ending the story with a big Dr. Doom smile. How lovely. I love a happy ending.